walking down every road, trying to find a trail to sniff my way back home.
Hello again, gamers, and welcome back for another episode of Grokking Twilight Imperium. I'm the board game captain, and today I'm going to be showing you how to grok the Arborec, those alien fungus, sentient fungoid creatures that can spread throughout the galaxy and are tough as nails and really hard to remove from a planet once they infest it. So before I get started, I do want to thank one of my regular viewers for requesting that I cover the Arborec in my Grokking Twilight Imperium series. Thank you to Shugenja, who requested that I do an episode on the Arborec. Also, before we get started, I want to say that if you're in a position to and you'd like to help out the channel, there's a link to my Patreon in the description below. There you can get access to early release videos, behind the scenes videos, and also the ability to request review and tutorials to your favorite classic games. Also, if you'd like to get yourself some cool gamer gear, there's a link to my Teespring store in the description down below where you can get awesome gamer mugs and t-shirts, etc. Alright, so now, the Arborec. Again, sentient fungus race, fungal, very strange, very unique. They were in one of the expansions in 3rd edition, and then now in 4th edition are included in the base set. Their abilities from 3rd edition to 4th edition have changed slightly, and with the new expansion of Prophecy of Kings have become, in my opinion, one of the most powerfully defensive factions in the entirety of Twilight Imperium 4th edition. Some of their abilities, especially in the way they work in concert with each other, make them very difficult to remove from planets once they've taken them. Not impossible. There are certain cards you can use that can really help out, and also certain abilities. But generally speaking, if they really want a planet, it's going to be tough to get them out. They're like an infestation of fungus. It's tough to remove them, which is very thematic. So to start with, what do you get to begin with when you play as the Arborec? So, of course, you are going to start with your home system of Nestvar. Nestvar has 3 resources and 2 influence, so it's not a bad starting planet. I mean, it's not phenomenal, but it's pretty good. Three resources is pretty good, and 2 influence is pretty good for a starting planet, so it's not bad. Then, to start with, in that system, you get 4 ground troops, which is good. You get 2 fighters. You have a carrier, who of course can hold all of those. Your space dock, which of course everyone gets. You get a PDS to help defend that world, and you get a cruiser. Now, this is a larger than average amount of ground troops and fighters to be for a single carrier starting with. But there is only the one carrier, so you might think these guys would be one of the factions that's rather slow to start expanding into the galaxy, because how cruiser Mark 1s are not having any carrying capacity. However, you'd be wrong. Based on their abilities, especially on some of the abilities, which I'm going to get to in a minute, that came in the Prophecy of Kings expansion, they actually are going to be fairly quick to expand, and if you focus on expansion, can actually be on par with some of the fastest expanding factions. But I'll get to that momentarily. In addition, the last thing they start with is they get 1 technology. It is the red tech, the Magan Defense Grid. Now, this one is going to be very important for their awesome defensive abilities and being able to really hold planets tooth and nail. And this ability, if you don't recall, is you may exhaust this card at the start of a round of ground combat on a planet that contains 1 or more of your units that have planetary shield. So to start with, you have, of course, your PDS has planetary shield, but there's other units they get with planetary shield. I'll get to that in a minute. Your opponent cannot make ground combat rolls during this combat round. So during the first round of a ground combat, you get to do a lot of attacking and they don't get to do anything back to you. This makes it really hard to take out your ground forces that you're going to have on your home system with its PDS, but also a little bit of a spoiler for later, something I'm going to talk about. Their mechs get planetary shields. So when you have your mech on a planet, once you've taken it, this is going to make that planet really hard to get rid of without an ability that first damages or wipes out the ground forces on that planet. There's certain cards that can do that, and there's certain super abilities that can do that. But without those, this is going to make them really tough to remove them. Your enemy is going to have to commit tons of ground forces and mechs to an invasion to get you out. But we'll get to that in more detail when we get up to talking about their mech. Now, they have one special ability and one special ability only, and it is an interesting one because it has some negative along with some positive with it, though the negative is immediately counteracted by one of their units that is different on their starting card than it is on everyone else's. I'm going to get to that one second. So their ability is mitosis. Your space docks cannot produce infantry. At the start of your status phase, place one infantry from your reinforcements on any planet you control. So once per full round, you will get one free infantry. Now that does not seem like a lot. It's not a lot, and it is, but it is able to be placed on any planet, whether it has production or not. So that is something, and that's kind of cool. But you know, to start with, you're looking at this and you're like, well, I can't just say produce a bunch of infantry. That kind of stinks. Until you notice they don't have normal infantry. They have Latani Warrior 1, which is the Arborec specific infantry. Stat-wise, they're like normal infantry. You pay 1, you get 2. They have a combat of 8. Seems normal. Then you notice they have production 1. They have production 1. You start with 4 of these guys. These are fantastic. You don't even really need to build space docks with the Arborec. You're gonna be slowly, spreading out, building more of these ground troops as you go. You're gonna wind up having ground troops probably on almost every planet you have, and then every planet you have, when you build there, you're gonna be able to build more ground troops. The 4 you have means that if you have them on a single planet, that automatically will give you production 4 on that planet, and on the starting planet, along with your space dock, which is going to get even more production. That you could build a lot of stuff if you really wanted to focus in on that. Of course, you're going to want to go out, you're going to want to colonize some planets, but even those planets, if you're taking at least 2 of the ground troops with you, you're going to immediately give them production 2. You put 2 ground troops on that planet, it's got production 2, you can immediately build another 2 ground troops in that same action because you activated that system, which is fantastic. So one of the things is you are going to want to have lots of trade goods or resources around to be able to do lots of these little productions as you go, and you'll keep just reproducing, doing the having the ground troops make more ground troops. So okay, now the next thing I want to look at, now that we've looked at everything that the Arborec starts with, plus the Arborec's faction ability, is I want to look at what are their, I want to look at the mech that we talked about before, and I also want to look at their agent, commander, and hero. What are the abilities you get through the mech, the agent, commander, and hero? So I want to talk about the mech first. So the mech is a 2+ mech, 6 combat. He has sustained damage. So up to this point, that's pretty standard for mechs. The rest of what the mech has is what makes him amazing. So the mech comes with a planetary shield. So not only is that just as awesome as every other planetary shield, which normally you just get through PDSs with most other factions, but don't forget, you start with the Mag and Defense grid. So you want to get these mechs out as soon as possible and on your important planets that you want to defend. You want to keep bringing them along to the front lines, because with the Mag and Defense grid, that first round of combat with that mech and those other ground troops, they're going to wipe out a good portion of your opponent's invasion force before they even get to fire back, and that's fantastic. Now, in addition to the sustained damage and the planetary shield, they also have production 2. So 1 mech gives you as much production as 2 infantry. That's huge. And then also they have a deploy ability. This is actually one of the largest groupings of abilities on one of the mechs I've seen. They have like so many extra abilities. The deploy ability is when you would use the mitosis faction ability, you can instead replace 1 of your infantry with 1 mech from your reinforcements. So this is amazing. Now, of course, you can instead take 1 infantry, but while you have mechs, and this is something you probably should do fairly early, especially with the infantry that you're taking with your carrier, because As I'll explain later, you can't move the mechs around with one of the faction-specific technologies that you're going to get with the Arborec, but you can use move the ground troops around. We'll get to that later when we're discussing bioplasmosis. It's just so many of these abilities work synergistically with each other. I can't help but have to reference stuff that I'm going to discuss later in this video. But these guys can be moved around by the carrier. So having one immediately after at the end of the first round, having one of your ground troops turn into a mech and being transported around by the carrier will make immediately that force have a higher production when they are out and producing units on newly colonized worlds. It will also make your frontline worlds more defensible because you're going to have a mech on them instead of a ground force, and that is going to be awesome. So that all works very well together. Now, the next ability I want to talk about is the ability for the agent. Now, the agent, of course, you start with your agent's ability, and they are always an action. They are always a one-off action that you can do once per full round. And in this case, it is Latani Osfa. Unity through Peace is the name of the action. It costs one action, and it allows you exhaust this card, and you choose a player's non-fighter ship, and that player may replace that ship with one of their reinforcements that cost up to 2 more than the replaced ship. Okay, so you can do this for an ally, but let's be real, mostly you're going to do it for yourself. And you're going to do it as your first action on your first round. And the reason you're going to do it as your first action on your first round is you're going to exhaust this, and you're going to replace your cruiser with a dreadnought. Now, this is why I was saying, based on abilities later, you'll see they actually are going to be able to expand very quickly, because the reasons for replacing a cruiser with a dreadnought on your first turn of your first round is simple. The dreadnought, in addition to being more powerful than the cruiser, though slower, has capacity 1. So now you're going to be able to do two tactical actions where you go out and colonize 2 different systems. You're going to send your carrier with a couple of fighters and a couple of ground troops, and it's going to go out and colonize 1 or 2 planets, while your dreadnought, through a separate action, is going to go out with 1 ground troop and colonize a single planet system somewhere. And you're going to probably leave 1 back on your home system to help with production there, because it does increase your production on your home planet by 1. This is going to help in future turns of the first round, making the Arborec expand much more quickly, much faster, even on par with some of the top tier expanders in all of Twilight Imperium. This simple action, taking this one first, turning the cruiser into a dreadnought, is going to be huge, and in my opinion, is almost mandatory to be your first action. And in point of fact, it's probably going to be one of your first couple of actions every round, because every round you're going to want to build something like a cheaper cruiser and replace it with a more expensive dreadnought. And as you're building these occasionally further out in the galaxy, you'll even be counteracting the slow movement of the dreadnought, because they'll already be on the front lines. Now, for the commander is Durzaga Rofal, Peace Through Strength. And now their ability is unlocked when you have 12 ground forces on planets you control. You start with 4 ground forces, and it's not going to be long before you have 12. I don't expect it to be long at all, because of the fact that all of your ground forces have production. So this is going to happen very quickly. Once you unlock the ability Peace Through Strength, your ability is, after another player activates a system that contains 1 or more of your units that have production, you may produce 1 unit in that system. So here's the thing. If you are doing like I have suggested and spreading ground troops on all of your planets, at least leaving 1 behind everywhere so that you have production everywhere in your sector of the galaxy, when one of your opponents comes in and tries to attack one of your worlds and take it from you, you can instantly produce. Now, you still have to pay the cost of that producing, but the ground troops can produce anything. They can even produce ships. So you could be like, boom, here's 4 resources, and I'm going to have a dreadnought in this system now. Later on, when you have tons of resources and the ability to make war suns, you could even throw out a war sun. Or possibly throw out your, before that, you could possibly throw out your flagship. This ability is awesome defensively, because it basically allows you to surprise your opponent. your opponent's like, I'm going to come in and attack you. All you have there is one dreadnought and one carrier with some fighters and ground troops. And you're like, boom, nope, I have a second dreadnought. Or later on when you have lots of resources around, boom, no, I have a war sun with that dreadnought and that carrier. That can totally change the balance of power for that battle. And if your opponent doesn't realize to consider that and pay attention to how many resources you have that you can spend, that can turn what looks like an easy win for them into suddenly a tooth and nail fight, and probably an easy win for you, especially if you're able to get like your flagship or a dreadnought in there. Now for their hero ability, they have Latani Mayasmiala, I think is how it's pronounced. It says strength through unity, though their actual ability is overgrowth once you release them. Now all heroes, of course, are unlocked by scoring 3 objectives. So once you score your 3 objectives, you get a one-use action, as per all the heroes, that then you have to, of course, purge this card from the game. Now this one-use action is pretty interesting. It allows you to produce any number of units in any number of systems that contain one or more of your ground forces. So of course you're still going to have to, abide by the production limits in those systems and also have to pay for all these units. But this is one of those things where suddenly you can have a fleet show up out of nowhere in a couple different places on the border when your opponent is getting ready to attack you, and suddenly you have a great defense. Also, if you want to use this more offensively, suddenly you can have a huge fleet on the border with your opponent that they didn't know was there, and you can actually use it to attack. Now, I feel like the Arborec, it should more often be used defensively because most of their abilities are very defensive, but this particular ability can be used offensively. Suddenly, I have 3 huge fleets on my opponent's border, and they weren't expecting them to be there because there was like nothing there to begin with. And now on my next couple of actions, I move them in and take a few systems from them. That could be huge, and that could be absolutely game-changing. Okay, so next I want to talk about what technologies, other than the mag and defense grid that you start with, what technologies should you really get for the Arborec? So the Arborec have 2 faction-specific technologies. One is a regular tech, the other is a unit upgrade. Of course, because like any faction that has a unique specific unit, like they do with their Latani warriors versus ground troops, they have to have then a unique upgrade to them. So both of these are really good, and you're going to want them. But I'm not going to start with them because both of these require you to have at least 2 green techs already researched. So you're going to want to hold off on these. There's a lot of others you're going to want to go for first, especially because you're going to have to go for 2 of the greens first. In addition, there's tons of reds that I really like, and the Sarween tools I like. Now, blues, I don't feel like any of the blues are specifically really good for the Arborec. Later, you might want to grab some blues just to get the prerequisites to be able to do upgrades for some of the units, because the carrier needs you to have 2 blues, the fighter needs you to have 1 blue, dreadnought upgrade needs you to have 2 blues, and the thing is, with the techs I'm telling you are really good for the Arborec, none of them are blue. So there are some of the blues you're going to want. They're great blue cards that are good for everybody, like for instance the Dark Energy tab, which I always recommend to everybody to get eventually because they're so good to get those tokens and be able to explore those frontier tokens and possibly get shards. So yeah, there are some of those that could be great, but I still don't think they're ones you should go for right away. They're kind of ones you're going to get later on a whim. So to start with, what green techs are you going to want to get? Specifically, I have 2 to recommend to get the prerequisites for the 2 faction-specific techs. So the first one I recommend is Psychoarchaeology. So this has no prerequisites, and it says you can use the technology specialties on planets you control without exhausting them, even if those planets are exhausted. And during the action phase, you can exhaust planets you control that have technology specialties to gain 1 trade good. Now, this is not something that is specifically awesome for the Arborec, but it is awesome for everybody. But I did need to pick one of the basic ones to start with before getting one that has a single prerequisite, and then the 2 faction specifics that have 2 green prerequisites. So the single prerequisite, which is a really good one for the Arborec, is after you win a ground combat, you may place 1 infantry from your reinforcements on that planet. This is just awesome and thematic in that you get more free infantry, and more free infantry is good, so I really like this. So once you have those, you can get the 2 faction-specific ones, and these are phenomenal. So the first one I want to talk about is the unit upgrade for the Litani Warrior 2. Now, with the Litani Warrior 2, you get the same ability you get from normal Infantry 2, which is that after a unit is destroyed, roll a die. On a 6 or greater, you put the unit on this card, and then at the start of your next turn, each unit that you have placed on this card, you can place on a planet that you control in your home system. So this allows you to get some of your dead units back. Now, they're all the way back in your home system, and for most people, the Infantry 2, that ability is not that great, but it synergizes really well with the other faction tech, because the other faction tech is going to help you get those units from your home system easier and more quickly out into your front lines, and that is bioplasmosis. At the end of the status phase, you may remove any number of infantry from planets you control and place them on one or more planets you control in the same or adjacent systems. Meaning, with these level 2 Litani warriors, who now have a combat of 7, which is even better than the regular ones, they can possibly not die, come back to your home world, and then slowly spread back out into the galaxy on their own without the use of carriers. Yeah, this pair of upgrades are awesome and are going to really help you to continually bring back more ground troops and spread them out there throughout the galaxy. So yeah, I highly recommend getting those 2 greens right away if you can, and then getting these. Another technology upgrade you want to get very early is the Sarween tools, which this one is a great one for everyone, but it's especially good for the Arborec. When one or more of your units use production, reduce the combined cost of the production by 1. So, the reason it's especially good for the Arborec is the Arborec can do lots of little productions here and there with all of their little ground troops, which if you can get this out early, you're going to literally be able to get free ground troops. So what you're going to do is you move into a new system, you colonize it, you drop 2 ground troops on 1 planet. Then you do a production with that planet, and you pay nothing because it only costs 1 to make 2 ground troops, and you use the 2 production to make 2 more ground troops on your new planet. You're literally going to be getting, with the Sarween tools, free little productions every time you go in and colonize new worlds. So this is one, again, I would almost recommend this one to be the first one you get, because this is actually even more important in my opinion than the greens. It's just that there's nothing else within the yellow tree, the yellow tech tree, that I really feel is super important to the Arborec. So you get this and then start working on your greens, and then start working on your reds. So what do I recommend for the red techs? So you've already got the mag and defense grid, but there is a 0 requirement red tech that I think is really good. It is when you research a unit upgrade technology, you may exhaust this card to ignore any one prerequisite. And then when 1 or more of your units use production, you may exhaust this card to reduce the combined cost of the produced units by the number of unit upgrade technologies that you own. So I've already said you're going to get the Litani Warrior 2. You're probably going to get some other unit upgrades, especially you're going to wind up with the War Sun. You can start doing even larger productions as you get further into the game. With this combined with the Sarween tools, doing production steps of your tactical actions are going to suddenly allow you to be getting ground troops and free ships in these systems. You're going to have some of the largest fleets and largest militaries out there. So this is a really good one to get. It may not be the first one you get out of the reds. It's actually one I think I might postpone to a little later, but it definitely would be one you're going to want to come back and get. Now, this one requires you to have 1 red already, but you do already have 1 red, so you could get this one as your first red tech upgrade. And of course, the 1 red you had was the mag and defense grid that you started with. So this one is the self-assembly routines. After 1 or more of your units use production, you may exhaust this card to place 1 mech from your reinforcements on a planet you control in that system. After 1 of your mechs is destroyed, gain 1 trade good. So I've already talked about how awesome mechs are. You have another ability that allows, on the mech itself, that allows you to turn infantry into mechs, but here's another way to get mechs, and also the fact that destroying the mechs gives you free trade goods means, yeah, you're gonna want to have those mechs on the front lines anyway to help defend your planets. You might wind up losing them. If you lose them, you're gonna get money back that you can then use to further make more or buy other things as well. This is a really good card for the Arborec for sure. Now, this one Duranium armor requires 2, and this goes very well with the defensive capabilities of the Arborec. During each combat round, after you assign hits to your units, repair 1 of your damaged units that did not sustain damage during this combat round. Now, this works for both space combat and ground combat. And I already talked about how, 1, you're going to have tons of mechs in the planets you're controlling, and 2, you're going to have tons of dreadnoughts in the systems you're controlling. Both of those use sustained damage. So, first round of space combat, sustain damage on them, get rid of some fighters. First round of ground combat, sustain damage on your mechs, get rid of a couple ground troops. Second round, just get rid of the low-cost guys, ground troops and fighters, or if you have to, maybe some other ships like destroyers. And then, after you assign hits, you get to repair that damage. So third round of combat, you can sustain damage again. Very useful, very awesome for the Arborec. They're going to be using a lot of units with sustained damage. This is fantastic. Makes them really tough to get rid of once they have taken over planets in the system. And finally, and this one is, again, awesome for everybody, but you're going to have a lot of big fleets, so you're going to have a lot of places where this is going to work when people try to attack you. Assault cannon. Requires 3 reds. At this point, you've probably got 4 red techs out. At the start of space combat in a system that contains 3 or more of your non-fighter ships, your opponent must destroy one of his non-fighter ships. Again, amazingly good defensively. Once you take Mechatol Rex, you are going to be so difficult to remove from there. You're going to have a big fleet in there, and you're going to have ground troops that are constantly reproducing and expanding the number of ground troops you have there, plus mechs. You got all these techs out. You're probably not going to be the first person to take Mechatol Rex, but once you take it from whoever got it first or even second, you're going to be really tough to remove. You're going to hold it for a while and keep taking that Imperial card and gaining points. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about, because I do think that unit upgrades are very important for the Arborec, because you want your units to be more powerful. So what upgrades do I recommend? So based on these technologies, you're going to have the prerequisites for destroyers to make destroyer 2s. I don't think they're that important. You can make some, but they're just okay. I mean, granted, you can upgrade them from destroyers to carriers with the ability from Latani Osfa, but actually I think because of the fact that you can use that ability to keep upgrading your ships, I'd rather buy cruisers that can then be upgraded to dreadnoughts, because they're much more powerful and do still have a bit of carrying capacity. But with the technologies I have recommended that you get, you will be able to get the PDS-2. Now, the cool thing about the PDS-2 is that it has a planetary cannon of 5, and it can fire into adjacent systems. So it's a more powerful, longer range planetary cannon. In addition, you will be able to get the War Sun. War Sun is something everybody wants to get, because when you get some of these bad boys out, these things are fleet killers. They are absolutely amazingly destructive. And you will need some other techs from the blue technologies. If you want to get the Dreadnought, you're going to need 2 blue techs. And also, if you want to upgrade the fighters, you're going to need 1 blue tech. You will have enough to upgrade the cruiser, but considering I'm recommending you turn most cruisers you build into dreadnoughts, that might be good, but you're probably going to wind up turning them into dreadnoughts, which are still more powerful than the cruiser 2s anyway. Next, I want to talk a little bit about their flagship. Now, their flagship is not as integral to their strategy as it is for some other factions out there, but it is still a pretty good flagship with a very interesting ability. So it costs 8. It has a combat rating of 7 with 2 attacks, which actually makes it a little subpar as flagships go. 2 attacks is good, but it's only got the combat capability of a cruiser, versus a lot of them usually have 5 on the attack, which gives them the combat capability of a dreadnought. It has move 1, so it's fairly slow, but now to counterbalance the lower attack rating, it has a capacity of 5, which is well above average. The average flagship usually only has a carrying capacity of 3. So this one can hold a nice mixture of ground troops and fighters, and therefore become a fleet unto itself. Put a couple ground troops on it, put 3 fighters on it, and have it head out, and its 2 attacks combined with the 3 fighters are pretty decent. Plus, I'm sure you're going to give it some escort ships to go with it, maybe a dreadnought or 2, and it's going to become a very powerful fleet. And then in addition, with the ground troops you have on here, and maybe a ground troop or 2 on the dreadnoughts, you're going to be able to colonize even multi-planet systems. The most interesting thing, though, about this flagship is its special ability. It has a very unique and interesting special ability. After you activate the system that the flagship is in, you may produce up to 5 units in the system. So you don't do a production step. So the Starwing Tools does not work with this. But you can produce 5 units in the system that this is in after you activate it. So this can be really useful for certain very specific situations, or also just useful on the defense. Once you take a system, and let's say it was a really hard fight to take the system, and you've lost a lot of ships, you could, on the next round, during your first action, activate that system, produce 5 units. Maybe you can rebuild some fighters that you need for this. Maybe you can also build some escort ships for it, like some cruisers that later you'll be able to upgrade into dreadnoughts, etc., and repopulate that system. But another very interesting and specific way this can be used offensively is when you attack a system and you wipe out the fleet, but maybe your ground troops were not sufficient in wiping out the ground troops on the planet. So now you have the system blockaded. You have the only fleet there, but your opponent still controls the planet. Next round, you can activate that system and instantly build ground troops. Because it happens right after you activate the system. It doesn't happen all the way at the end during the production step like it would normally happen during a normal tactical action. So you build the ground troops and do another ground combat. You don't have to wait to build more somewhere else. You just do it with this ship. So this is a very interesting and unique ability that can be done with this ship that is not usually available to most other factions when they are dealing with a multi-round affair of trying to take a world. This could be a very expected scenario when trying to take Mechatol Rex. Maybe you move in with a big fleet and you wipe out their fleet, but you don't clean up all of their ground troops. So very cool, very useful ability. I do really like it. I don't think it's super integral to the strategy I am recommending for the Arborec, but it is super interesting and situationally very useful. Now, next I want to talk about which strategy cards you should go for. So there isn't like a specific one where I'm 100% like, this is definitely the strategy card you should go for with the Arborec. There's a lot of other factions that have one that's like, you definitely want to go for that specific one. They have multiple that will work for them very well early on. In your first round, it might be very good to go for the warfare so you could expand more quickly and colonize more planets. That would be a very useful one. But also, it might be good to go for trade so you could get the extra trade goods and fill up your commodities, because you're going to want to have a lot of money for all these productions you're doing, especially if it's going to take you a little bit before you get the Starwing Tools out. You're going to want to have a bunch of money that you can spend. Secondarily to that, technology is a good one to take, because there's a lot of techs they want to get their hands on, and they want to get their hands on them quickly. And of course, only the primary ability of the technology allows you to get a tech for free. And later on, once you have enough resources to spend, you can even get a second tech out of taking that. Also, secondarily, leadership is good because you're going to want to get a lot of those command tokens. You're going to need a lot of them, both for tactic and strategy actions, but also you're going to need to increase your fleet sizes, because you're going to have some of the biggest fleets on the board. You're going to need to increase your capability to have larger size fleets. So those are really good. Now, second round, I highly recommend at that point going for tech. Now, the reason I didn't recommend it as hard on the first round is you're only going to get one technology out of it. But by the second round, you should have enough resources to get 2 technologies and start climbing up those tech trees. And there's a lot you're going to want to get. So the thing is, on the second round, you can very quickly take Starwing Tools and Psychoarchaeology, have both of those, or if you already took Starwing Tools in the secondary ability on the first round, maybe you take Psychoarchaeology and Daxiv Animators, so that way you will have the 2 green prerequisites you need to, on future rounds, start taking the faction-specific technologies, which are really awesome. There's a lot of techs you want to get pretty quickly with these, because they're going to really help you a lot. And then once you get those, you're going to want to start going up that red tech tree, like I already said, to get those amazing abilities to help you hold on to what you have already taken. And also, you're going to want to get some of those unit upgrades, of course. Also in later rounds, other than technology, of course, you're going to want to get your hands on leadership. The great thing about leadership, of course, is getting those extra command tokens, like I already said, and also occasionally trade and Imperial to score points. Now I want to talk about what secret objectives you should be looking for, what secret objectives are really good for the Arborec that you should look for with the secondary ability of the Imperial card, so that you can get those 3 objectives very easily to get your hero unlocked. So, I've got a bunch for the Arborec. There's a lot that work well for them. Some are gimmies, some you have to work a little harder at, but all of them are fairly easy for the Arborec because of how they play. So the first one I've got here, it's not a gimme, but it is one that you're going to get. It is own 2 faction technologies. You want to have these 2 faction technologies out. You want the one that has the upgrade to the Latani Warrior, and you want the Bioplasmosis. So that's going to be one that you're going to be going for anyway. This one is going to be almost a gimme. It's going to be one you're going to get very quickly. Have 1 mech on each of 4 planets. You're going to be getting lots of mechs out. I already told, from my recommendation, I had you going for 2 different ways to possibly get mechs out. One with the normal ability and the ability of the mech, and one with the red upgrade of self-assembly routines. If you have both those out, you're going to have tons of mechs out. So that one will be one that you're going to have. Next, I have Occupy the Fringe. Have 9 or more ground forces on a planet that does not contain one of your space docks. You're probably not going to need to build many space docks. You can once in a while if you really need to get more production once you get up to the front lines and you're adjacent to other players' controlled planets. But there's going to be a lot of these guys being made around and being able to produce guys in large quantities. This is not going to be very hard to do. The next one is produce in mass. Have units with a combined production of at least 8 in a single system. This is something that can be done very early on. It's almost a gimme because of the fact that you start with more production than that in your home system with all of those ground troops and the space dock on that planet. So granted, you're going to move some of those ground troops out, but if you do a production in the first round at some point in your home system, and along with everything else, make 2 more ground troops there along with the one that's already there and the space dock, you're going to have enough production to get that one. So that one's basically a gimme. This next one is not a gimme, but it is, again, one that will be very likely to happen. Use bombardment to destroy the last of a player's ground forces on a planet. You are going to have, if you follow my instructions here, quite a few dreadnoughts out there. The thing is, I'm recommending building cruisers quite a bit because then, once per round, you can, for free, upgrade a cruiser into a dreadnought. You're going to wind up with a lot of dreadnoughts by the time you're fighting opponents. Probably have an average of 2 dreadnoughts per, frontline major fleet. Being able to bombard with those dreadnoughts and possibly wipe out a couple of ground troops that were holding that planet, this could definitely happen. And then the last one is also dreadnought related. It is gather a mighty fleet, have 5 dreadnoughts on the game board. So yeah, that's going to be fairly inevitable between building dreadnoughts yourself and upgrading cruisers to dreadnoughts. You can easily wind up with 5 on the board. So these are all secret objectives I think that are really, really good to go for. So there you have it. These are my recommendations on how I would play the Arborec in a game of Twilight Imperium 4th edition. So I think you should expand fairly quickly once you get those planets. You're going to grow. You're going to produce. You're going to use all these abilities to produce quickly and cheaply in multiple small production phases. Then have to grab the leadership to get lots of tokens back. Use the warfare to expand quickly. Use technology to get lots of these awesome technologies that make you harder to remove from the systems once you've taken them. And then eventually, hopefully, you will take Mechatol Rex and hold it for the remainder of the game, grabbing Imperial again and again, continually building up that fleet in a defensive posture until you get enough points to win. And that's how I would play the Arborec. I think the Arborec are an incredibly competitive faction at the moment. Some of the abilities they got from the Prophecy of Kings, especially the Agent Commander and Hero and Mech abilities, are phenomenal. Their faction-specific tech, specifically, I really love the Latani Warriors and the Latani Warrior 2s, and then the Bioplasmosis. These are awesome. Yeah, I think these are a really good faction. I think you'd have a lot of fun playing as the Arborec, and I would recommend giving them a shot. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns on my strategies for playing the Arborec, feel free to put them in the comments down below. If you'd like to see me do more videos like this, be sure to give it a like, share it on all forms of social media, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to the Board Game Captain. That's Captain spelled with a K on YouTube. And you know what? Also comment down below and let me know what other factions should I cover? What should be the next faction I cover for Twilight Imperium 4th Edition in Grokking Twilight Imperium? And until next time, game on.